one more year and then you'll be happy. Another year and then you'll be happy. Just one more year and then you'll be happy.
Hey YouTube, my name's Seth, and knives are my life. Looking back on it, I think I've always been obsessed with knives, but it wasn't until about 2015 or so where I discovered through the internet that there was this whole wide knife industry of fellow hopeless knife addicts like myself. Ever since then, my collection has grown somewhat exponentially. Here today, I wanted to sort of reintroduce myself to YouTube by showing you my personal knife collection. To make it a little more interesting, I'm also going to be ranking my knife collection from worst to best. And this was a pretty painful exercise because everything here is, well, it has a spot that is irreplaceable. Either something I've learned about knives, something I think that they do better than anything else out there, something that has some sort of personal significance. Anyway, we have so many knives to get through. I'll explain as I go. Let's start with the Stragglers. Now, these knives in front of me are not actually in my permanent collection, at least like not mentally. The worst of the Stragglers, that's going to be this Emerson Commander. This Commander is particularly cool because it's one of the old examples with the old style pivot and backspacer there. They're not made like this anymore. The reason why it's the lowest of the Stragglers is because I just can't carry this these days. The G10 is way too aggressive. It rips up my pockets. The wave is sort of finicky. The detent's really soft. If you're an old school Emerson collector, you know these old Emersons have very soft detents. Yeah, I love the design. I like Emerson a lot. I think he's a great knife maker, but I just don't want to put this into my pocket and ruin a pair of pants after one day. So I never carry it. I also don't know if I'm ever going to be able to let it go because this is a knife with so much swagger. Love it, hate it, can't part with it. Next up, the Spyderco Zulu. This is an oddball, and the reason why it's here is it's because it's awaiting a new pocket clip. I'm looking forward to carrying this one. Jens Anso doesn't really do weirdo blade shapes like this anymore. You know, the quality is really good, but no pocket clip, so I haven't carried it yet. The next knife is something that's just too weird to put anywhere else, and it is the Heretic Stab Nana. I almost carried this straight for a whole month because it was just so fun. I couldn't put it down. I love the Cerakote work on this knife. Like, there's so many colors. All the lines are really precise and crisp. The concept makes me laugh. Action is amazing. Magna cut steel. You know, it's just a hawkbill blade. A little hard to use this every day for everything. Stuck in the Stragglers for now. This is, of course, a Spyderco Para 3. It's here because I don't need it. I have other Para 3s that I like more. This one, I put some skinny scales on it. I honestly don't think it improved the knife, so it's kind of here just for odd jobs. I do carry it from time to time. Great knife, just not special enough to really stress about keeping for me. This one is kind of a special knife though. This is the Wharncliffe Delica. I just like that this product was born out of a customer request from the forums, the Spyderco forums. Somebody drew this blade shape up on a pad of paper, uploaded it, and, 6 months later, it was a knife. And for what it's worth, the Wharncliffe Delica is my favorite. This version is one of the coolest that's ever been made. The only reason it's in the Stragglers is I want to get some aftermarket scales for it. I haven't done that yet, so it's here for now. But future mods may bump this up into the permanent collection. Spyderco Stretch 2. This is another sprint run. This one has V-Toku steel, kind of a simple carbon steel, laminated construction. Unless we're talking about the straight spine version, I prefer the original stretch. So this version just kind of doesn't have a place in my collection. It's a cool knife. I do use it from time to time. You know, it's good to have a tough, comfortable beater around. I may pass this one along at some point, but for now, it's in the Stragglers. This is not a Spyderco, but it desperately wants to be one. This is the Manly Peak. I really like backlocks. I think this is a well-made backlock. I think the knife is simple, but with really excellently thought through details. The knife is ground incredibly well. This is a super slicer. I don't know. I reach for it often. Just a knife that'll never let you down. Manly Peak. Get one if you haven't checked it out. Underrated for sure. Now, the only reason the Stretch 2 XL is in the Stragglers is because I want to get different scales for it. Grade G10 is the boringest handle material ever, and a knife this good deserves cooler handles. The Stretch 2 XL is, in my opinion, Spyderco's best design, period. I'll just leave it at that. We're spending too long on these anyway. This knife deserves better scales. Till then, it's in the Stragglers. This is a Sebenza, a small 21 in Singo. The reason this is here is because I want to replace it at some point with a 31. MagnaCut steel is a big upgrade over S35 VN. I've used this knife a lot, and I would really appreciate that extra toughness and edge retention. So I've kind of already reserved a spot in the permanent collection for a small Insingo 31. Now this knife is the Kershaw Tilt, and it is so cool and so different from really anything else I have that I just don't know where to rank it with the rest of my permanent collection. So it's here. Don't let that tell you anything about what I think about this knife, because it's incredible. It's just like, it's the knife equivalent of a concept car. Where do you even put it among the regular production lineup? If this is what Kershaw can make when they really put their minds to it, they are one of the best knife makers in the country. They just only flex that muscle every once in a while. So this knife feels even more special. It's so special, in fact, I just don't know where else to put it. All right, I gotta go rearrange some knives. I'll be back with the worst of my permanent collection. Okay, so the worst knife in my collection is this Spyderco Catcherman. And here's why I still have it. First of all, LC200N steel is fantastic. Rust-proof, pretty tough. I don't know, you've probably heard about it. It's incredibly thin on this knife. Under 2mm blade stock. Just like true fillet knife performance. And then the other reason is it's the most edge to weight maybe ever that I'm aware of. It's here in the collection, but holding it back is this color and honestly this pocket clip. Molded pocket clip. It's just waiting to break, and even worse, there's hardly any space under the clip. So I just have a hard time carrying this. It pretty much gets used in the kitchen. You know, it's still here. It's part of my permanent collection, but I'm not going to sit here and argue that everybody needs one of these. Next up are these two little knives from Sanrenmu. This is the 605 and 604. These are now the oldest knives in my collection. Everything older than this, I've lost or given away or sold to someone else. These have stuck around for so long for a couple of reasons. This was my first introduction to the finger choil, which gives you more effective handle space. Just a smart idea that, you know, still reminds me that good design does not have to be expensive, because the other reason why I've kept these for so long is the value. These were $8 shipped from China. The next best knife in my collection is this CJRB Rhea. You know, I like the CJRB Rhea a lot. I think it's one of the most elegant budget knife designs out there. But I think the real reason why this is still in my collection to this day is because this exact configuration was the first exclusive project I was ever involved in at the Knife Center. So yeah, I feel a little pride about that, and it's a nice memory. So I still have this knife, even though I rarely carry it. Now this is the Spyderco Walker, and this would be way, way higher on the list, except that this version just has some flaws that I can't ignore. It's an old knife. It's got pinned construction, and I don't want to ruin it. Otherwise, I'd carry it more. The next knife is a totally different story because the K-Bar Dozier Folding Hunter is a perfect design. And the only thing holding these back is the budget. These are built to a price and they don't have any real fancy fit and finish or even much quality control to speak of. But despite that, they are still one of the most effective, affordable, excellent budget knives you can buy. Next up is a knife that I happen to be really fond of, but that is really out of sync with today's knife market. And that's this little backlock folder from Moki. I forget what this is even called nowadays, but this knife has been made for decades. It's been sold rebadged as like a Klein Tools knife. Spyderco used to sell it for a while, believe it or not. It is been unchanged like since the 90s. The handle shape is unbelievably good. I love using this knife because it's just a pleasure to hold. All right, next we're getting into the slip joints in my collection, and in my heart they rank a lot higher, but looking at it objectively, the fact that they're missing a lock and missing a pocket clip just puts them lower on the list. So a couple of GECs to start. This is the 94. It's got 1095 steel, jig bone handles. This is how they're supposed to be done. Their quality is incredible. Their, refusal to adapt to modern manufacturing or use modern materials can be frustrating at times as a consumer, but is so much a part of their identity that I can't help but admire it. Yeah, this is an awesome pocket knife. And this is a GEC 18? Yeah, 18. The size is such that it's easy to just slip in a fifth pocket. I like the Wharncliffe blade. It works as a secondary edge for me. And I like Wharncliffe slip joints. I think, the mechanics of them just make a lot of sense. Moving up the list, we have this Pena X slip joint. I believe this is the Apache. And this particular version is another Knife Center exclusive project that I had a big hand in helping create. This one has K390 steel, which was something I kind of insisted on. I think, it's such an obvious thing to do. I don't know why more modern slip joint makers aren't doing it. Slip joint buyers like carbon steels. Why not use a modern carbon steel for a modern slip joint? K390s, amazing stuff. Toughness, edge retention, top of the charts. So put it on a slip joint and, embrace the patina and the character of slip joints, but get all the modern performance out of it. Back to GEC with this bullet end jack. This is the 85. I've carried this one a lot. This is probably my most carried slip joint. I love everything about this. The pinched bolsters, the really wide spear point blade, the easy open notch. Just great. Always fun to carry this, so it gets put in the pocket a lot. Another one that I'll make room in my pocket for is this Pena X Zulu spear, I think it is. These G10 handles are super lightweight, so it's easy to carry. It's got M390 steel, keen hollow grind. Yeah, everything you want out of a slip joint design, but with modern materials. And at the top of the heap of my slip joint collection is this, the Loveless City Knife by Lone Wolf Knives, manufactured in Italy by Fantoni. All of those brands are no longer around. Fantoni's gone, Lone Wolf's gone, Bob Loveless passed away. But this knife stands still as one of the finest production slip joints ever made, in my opinion. It's one of the few knives that I've actually enjoyed so much I went and got a spare for. I have another one of these new in box locked up in my garage somewhere, and if I ever break or misplace this knife, I'm going to take it right out, put it to work again. The last three knives in this section are at the top because they feature a locking mechanism. This right here is the Moki Kronos, I think. Got a back lock. Moki does incredible work. This is a knife I'll pull out when I'm feeling medium fancy. It's a little bigger than some of my other dress knives. It's got a little bit of swagger with these awesome barbed wire jigged bone covers, but it's also got that Moki just absolute gleam to it The handwork they do on these is incredible. The satin finishes really pop. The edge is polished. The back spring is seamless, totally invisible. It's the quality of a custom knife for a production price. And that's also true of this next Moki knife, because this is my maximum fancy knife. This is what I'll take to like a wedding or something. It's mirror polished all over. This is a special knife that I save for special occasions, but love to pull it out when the time arises. And finally is a Spyderco Jester. Spyderco Jester. You got a bit of jimping up here to control the tip. It's a 3-finger knife, but locks into your fingers. It's a tiny, tiny knife, but it doesn't feel tiny in use. And yeah, I'll toss this in the pocket as a spare edge to have on me sometimes. This thing's just fun, so I keep it around. Oh, also, glow-in-the-dark handles. Yeah, gotta love that. Okay, we're like 20 minutes in and we're barely out of the slip joints, so I'm gonna have to speed up if I wanna get through all these knives today. We're still relatively low on the list in terms of worst to best in my collection, and the reason these knives are here is because many of them are small. At some point, I just kind of graduated to carrying bigger knives, got used to having all that extra edge with me, so I don't carry small knives very much anymore, but when I do, I'll still reach for one of these, like this Baby Banter. This is the Wharncliffe version, and as you might notice from the other side of the table there, I think that the Wharncliffe version is not nearly as good as the original version. I think it has something to do with this edge angle. I mean, it just kind of tilts away like a Kiradashi, and it makes it a little harder to control, a little harder to cut in the kind of aggressive way I want a Wharncliffe to cut. So yeah, I mean, I still like the contoured purple handles on this, and I like having another version of a great knife in my collection, but I'll almost always reach for the regular Baby Banter over this. Then we have this Spyderco Patadese. This knife is just hard to use. I like carrying it a lot. I like the wire pocket clip. I like the handles. It's very slim in the pocket, especially for a Spyderco. But the tip is extremely narrow and it's kind of out there in front of you, so I'm always a little trepidatious when I actually use this thing. Great knife, well built, easy to carry, just a little hard to actually use. Next up is the Centofonte, the original Centofonte from Spyderco. I have a version with the plain edge, a version with the serrated edge. These were some of the very first knives that Spyderco ever even made in the United States. And they just have a lot of interesting character that isn't present on knives manufactured today. They've got these cool fluted back spacers, grippy rubber inserts, ATS 34 steel. These would be a lot higher if I was more comfortable kind of using them day to day. To me, they represent a piece of knife history and I just don't want to use them up. Next up, the Spyderco Dragonfly. And this is what I'm talking about when I say I've sort of outgrown carrying small knives, because this is one of the greatest small knife designs of all time, and I just never carry it anymore. I keep these in my collection because a Spyderco Dragonfly was the first real knife I ever bought, the first kind of brand name, high performance cutting tool, but yeah, it just feels a little small for what I need these days. If I'm going to carry a knife this small, I'll carry it as a secondary knife alongside something else. And so the Dragonfly rarely goes in my pocket, but I still recommend them all the time. If you want a small knife, it doesn't get much better than the Dragonfly. So do what I say, not what I do. Now this knife is actually one of my very favorite knives in my whole collection. This is the Spyderco Little Nalaka, and it's beautiful and beautifully made and slices with an incredible ease thanks to its zero grind. But because of that zero grind, it's also very, very delicate. And I really baby this thing. I only carry it as a secondary knife or to some sort of dressy special occasion. That thing that makes it special also kind of holds it back from being a true everyday knife. So yeah, one of my favorites, but just can't carry it all the time. All right, another couple vintage Spydercos here. This is the Jess Horn. I think the only thing holding this knife back from being a competitive option in Spyderco's modern catalog is the pinned construction. If they were to re-release this with screw together construction and, maybe rearrange that pocket clip placement, I could see this making a big comeback because it has everything you want out of a modern folding knife. Full-sized ergonomics, nice precise blade, great in all kinds of grips. This handle pattern I'd like to see come back too. The texture is actually just the designer's name tessellated over and over again. Jess Horn, Jess Horn, Jess Horn, Jess Horn. Cool detail. I don't know. Maybe this one will see a comeback if Spyderco ever re-engineers it, but I don't know that there's a lot of demand out there for it, so probably not. So this is the first Benchmade we've seen today, which means it's the worst Benchmade we've seen today. Still a great knife though. This is the Mini Presidio. The only reason it's not higher up is because the redesign's better. I don't like that they took Mel Pardew's name off the blade because I still think it's kind of his design, but I can't deny that the redesign is better. So this just feels a little small. I feel a little far away from the tip when I'm kind of holding it in the grip that the handle ergonomics want me to use. Still, that hollow grind cuts like crazy. I like carrying this, but yeah, definitely been surpassed by more modern Benchmades. Now this is the Spyderco Astute, and everything about this design is amazing except for the materials. 8CR13 MOV steel, plain G10 handles are the only thing holding this back from being one of Spyderco's best budget knives. The ergonomics are fantastic. It's the perfect size, perfect shape for all grips. I love how close you can get to the edge. Nice thin blade stock. Just a pleasure to use. And, for what it's worth, the 8CR, it's held up well, but there's no denying it would sell better with different blade steel. So I hope Spyderco updates this before they discontinue it, because this is a hidden gem. And then here it is, the best small knife in my collection, the Baby Banter. The blade shape is great. It feels very tough for such a small knife. I've even pried with this thing. It's got enough meat up there at the tip to kind of take some abuse. It's very fun and easy to deploy. The pocket clip's great. I like the micarta scales. Yeah, if you want to carry a small knife, check out the Baby Banter first. Okay, now we're really getting into it. This is about the middle of the pack in my collection. Not the worst, not the best, but let's kick it off with the full-sized, old-school Benchmade Presidio. I prefer the ergonomics on this a lot more to the Mini. It just feels like the right amount of space to have this much of a flare to the guard there. Definitely a heavy, chunky, tactical knife. It's got an old-school Benchmade charm to it, but yeah, like I said, the redesign's just better, so you'll see that further up on the list. Okay, now, maybe this is a controversial opinion, but I think the Para 2 is the worst member of the Para family. I like the Para 3 better. I like the military better. The Para 2 is just that awkward middle child. I rarely reach for it. I get intellectually the fact that it could be Spyderco's most well-rounded design, but that also means that there are other Spydercos that do anything you want to do better. If you want a better slicer, you go for the Sage or the Delica. If you want a better tactical knife, you get the full-size military. If you want, more ambidextrous, you get the Mannix. The Para 2 suffers a bit from that middle child syndrome, and that's why it's this low on the list. This is the full-sized Spyderco Patata. I prefer this to the Para 2 because it's a lot easier to carry. Got smooth handles, wire pocket clip, it's narrower, so I'll end up putting this in my pocket a lot. Even though it's bigger than the little Patadese, it feels a little easier to control. Maybe there's just more handle to work with, I don't know what it is. I just think the full size is better, and that's why it's here and not next to its little brother. Next we have the vintage and the modern versions of the Masad Ayub. This is a knife that taught me a lot about knife design. I was never interested in this knife until I got a chance to handle the new version, and I liked it so much, I went back and got one of the vintage versions when I saw it for sale on eBay. The thing that makes this knife work so well is its combination of negative angle to the blade, up sweep to the tip, and negative angle to the handle. When it's in your hand in a natural grip and you're twisting it, the tip stays dead still. Even when you're just cutting through some cardboard or something, the control you have is just unreal with this knife. It feels like nothing else. And it also kind of represents to me the fact that you really have to use a knife before you judge it. This knife was easy to judge just by looking at it because of how strange it looked, but it took putting it to use to teach me what it did well. And this knife, sadly, is another one you can't get anymore. This is the old school Pacific Salt with the Endura 3 handles and H1 steel. Now, I get why Spyderco changed to the new Endura handles, and it mostly has to do with this pocket clip, because if this ever gets worn out, it's going to wobble around and you won't be able to fix it. It only has the one screw holding it in, and you'd have to replace the whole handle in order to fix the kind of anchor point for the pocket clip. But I do think this handle shape's better. I like how thin it is. I like how light it is. If you still see one of these available for sale, you should pick it up because it's the best version. Well, I guess I lied when I said the Baby Banter was the best small knife on the list, because here is the ProTech Runt 5. This knife is so cool. I think this is the best small knife in my collection. It is a little dressier. It is very precisely made. It's more refined. The materials are better. Small automatic knives are extra special. For one thing, they're faster than large knives. The blade deployment is just instantaneous because you're not dealing with all the inertia of a bigger blade. But they're also kind of like, it's just a very refined way to open a little blade like this, rather than picking and plucking at it and kind of, small knives can be awkward to use, and the automatic turns that into just a very elegant, very minimal effort operation. Just barely touch it and there, your knife is out. So, automatics have this reputation for being tactical, crazy, aggressive knives, but let's not forget, when they were first invented, they were marketed to women so that they could open a pocket knife without breaking their nails. So, yeah, automatic knives can be classy. Okay, next is the Demko Shark Cub. Forget which one. This is Demko's best production knife. If we're not talking about the USA made versions that are very expensive, this is the one I would get. I think it's better than the 20.5. I think it was designed to be this size. It just feels right. And I like how slim this is. Plus it's got a deep carry clip. So yeah, it's a little more EDC optimized for a Demko design. Okay, here at the middle of the table is my 3 pair of 3s. Starting with the 52-100 Sprint carbon steel. Then we have the Rex 45 version, another Sprint run, and the Crew Wear, which is at the top. This is my favorite. I really wish they had maintained this color G10 for all the Crew Wear Sprints. It's so much nicer than that drab gray that they've gone to. I'm going to stick to what I said about the Para 2. It's still my least favorite, but I must admit, I do not carry a Para 3 without a aftermarket clip. It needs that modification in order to be the knife that it kind of was born to be. But an even better knife than the Para 3 is the Delica. Yep, I'm afraid that is my opinion. The Delica is perfect the way it is. It doesn't need a new clip. It doesn't need a new handle shape. It doesn't need anything. It's simple, affordable, excellent. I love the Delica, and I have several of them in my collection. This version is the Emerson Wave. Emerson Wave works better on this than it does on any Emerson, and I like the tough saber grind. Sure, it doesn't slice the best, but you get more toughness, and I've been really, really rough on this knife, and it's held up great. This is maybe one of my favorite work knives of all time. Next are a couple of discontinued beauties. This is the Almar Eagle and Falcon, I think. Of the two, I prefer the Falcon to the Eagle. The Eagle is so large, it gets in its own way a little bit, in my opinion. The one thing that holds these knives back from being further up the list is the blade steel. Everything about these knives is like heirloom quality, just finished to perfection, made precisely. But Aussate blade steel is gonna sharpen away pretty quickly over time, and I wished they had offered some other versions with blade steel to match the kind of high-end excellence of the rest of this knife. But, Almar is not the company it once was. They don't make these anymore like this, so I'm still really glad to have these in my collection. Next up is an old school buck knife designed by Tom Mayo. This is the smaller of the two Buck Mayo collaborations. This is called the Waimea. It's a titanium frame lock with S30V steel. And I really wish they would make this knife again. It is so good. Tom Mayo is like your favorite knife maker's favorite knife maker. Everything about his knives are pure fundamentals. He just does not miss with any of the details that matter, and he's been doing it for longer than just about anyone. There's a reason why his knives are still incredibly, incredibly expensive to get, and I wish that we as everyday consumers could get more production collaborations like this. So, Buck, bring this back, please. Such a cool knife. Okay, let's motor through the last of them here on the table. Some oddballs from Spyderco and otherwise. This is the Hungarian. Beautiful knife. Love to carry this. Surprisingly comfortable. Great CTS XHP steel. Interestingly, the guy who designed this also designed the Spyderco Astute. Not a very prolific designer, but clearly knows what he's doing even when he's playing with some pretty wild traditional designs like this. This is a pretty fun knife. Came out earlier this year. The Spyderco Spy Mito. Collaboration between Lion Steel, Spyderco. They basically took an existing Lion Steel knife, slapped a spider hole on it, called it a day. Definitely prefer this without the flipper tab. It's got one of those like removable flipper tabs. I think it works better as a thumb operated knife. This is a weird one. I don't even remember the brand of this. I do know that it's a Ivan Bragnitz design. I bought this one off of the secondary market and just really connected with it. It's got this crazy, super huge fuller in the blade here that almost acts like an S grind, like on a chef's knife for food release. It makes it a very aggressive cutter, helped by the fact that the actual edge is incredibly thin. Yeah, I don't know where this knife came from. I'm pretty sure it was manufactured in China based on how little I paid for it. But it's got the precision of something like a, custom knife factory or something. Really cool custom hardware here. Nice, usable, sculpted titanium clip. And a lot of details here that just let me know that the designer was thinking carefully about this one. Like the fact there's no texture underneath the clip. One of the few titanium frame lock flippers in my collection, but I really like this one. But you know what's a better knife than that? The humble Spyderco Endura 3. Yep, this is the best version of the Endura. The new one, a little stronger with its full liners, a little more effective slicing geometry with its full flat grind, but this is the best that the Endura ever got. It's more comfortable. It's got, in my opinion, a better blade shape, a little more precision at the tip, but it's still actually a drop point. As you can see, kind of wiggles on the table there. So you still can have a soft kind of approach to a cut if you need it. There's nothing on this knife that you don't need, and it's perfect for it. Okay, some of you might be a little surprised to see this knife so relatively low on the list because this is an Oz Roosevelt. It's one of the most expensive knives in my collection. It's a really kind of hyped up knife, and it is really good, but there are a couple little things about it that I don't love. For one thing, I don't love this blade shape. It's got a little too much belly for how short it is for me to feel like I'm always in control when I'm using it. And I think this pocket clip is not always great. There are certain pants that I wear that this just doesn't work with. It either gets stuck under the lock relief or won't go kind of underneath it. Luckily, it makes up for it with impeccable quality and an action that feels like nothing else I've ever felt. I think it has to do with the fact that there are 2 ceramic detents in here, but yeah, there's nothing else quite like it. If you haven't handled one, you owe it to yourself to try to handle one at least. The worst that'll happen is you can resell it for what you paid for it, probably. If I were to make a tier list of my collection instead of ranking them one by one, this would be the A tier. We're right up there. They're not quite in the S tier. We still have some more knives to put on the table, but these are some of the best. And if I'm going to grab a knife out of my collection to carry, more often than not, it's going to be from this kind of group right here. Starting off strong, literally, with the Cold Steel AD10. This right here, as far as I'm concerned, is the best folding knife Cold Steel has ever made. It is an Andrew Demko design with his triad lock. I'm lucky enough to own one of the very first production ones that actually has a hollow grind. I wish they'd kept that hollow grind because the way they implemented it, it was still really, really strong at the tip, but a little more keen behind the edge through here. So this thing's actually an incredible slicer, despite how thick the blade stock is. I love how this thing cuts. It's comfortable enough that you can push it like a fixed blade and actually truly power through with this thing. Thanks to the incredibly thick handles and the real like dramatic sculpted curvature to them, this is the most comfortable folding knife in my collection. But all that extra mass and size that gives it that comfort also means that it is very uncomfortable to carry clipped to a pocket. So I don't carry this one as much as I would like to, but I always enjoy using it when I do. Next up is another beastly folder. This is the Spyderco 100 Pacer. And there was a time where this was basically the only knife I was carrying. I was doing a lot of traveling, and this was, and maybe still is, the best substitute for a chef's knife that you can fold and put in your pocket. It's got a weird trailing point blade and a funky handle, but kind of like the Spyderco Masad Ayub, it makes sense when you start using it. Because of how wide it is, the point is actually pretty much at the center line, so it's still pretty controllable. And then you've got this drop to the edge that lets you, use it like a chef's knife on a cutting board. I couldn't carry a lot else in my pocket when I carried this, but it got a lot of use, and it's up here in this section for a reason. It's a great knife. And we've reached peak Delica. This is the Wharncliffe version with K390 steel. I think this is the best Delica ever made. It's great. It's perfect. It's the utility knife to beat all utility knives. The handle ergonomics are fantastic. I like these FRN scales. Pocket clip works perfectly. You can carry it any way you please. Backlock's reliable. The Delica is never a bad choice. I debated with myself for a while as to whether the Spyderco Watu was actually better than the Delica, but in the end, I do think it is just a little bit better. It's more precisely made. It's got that Tai Chung fit and finish. Blade steel is 20 CV. Good stuff. Compression lock is stronger and a little more stable than a backlock over time. I don't love these peel ply carbon fiber scales. Maybe I'll get some new ones for it, but nonetheless, the Watu is one of Spyderco's best EDC knives. I think it's been discontinued now, which is a shame, but I get it. It's a weird one. It's skinny, it's pointy. If you can find one, you should definitely get it though, because this is a future classic. I actually forget the name of this knife, but it is the Les George design with Spartan blades, and it's one of the best tactical folders you can get. This knife is perfectly balanced between being overbuilt and being a high performance cutter. It is, got a full length liner to keep it strong, but only on one side to keep it lightweight. It's just perfectly walks the line of modern tactical knife design to give you the best of all possible worlds. And you know what? It's also really affordable. It's got CTS XHP steel, and I think these are like 150-ish bucks. It could be like your only knife, honestly. It just does everything. Okay, next is the first of two Benchmade 710s in my collection. The new one is going to rank a little lower than the old one. Still a great knife. The bones are all here of what made the original one so special. It's got a really long blade that offers you a ton of cutting edge. I like the recurve on it. Makes it feel even more aggressive. It folds up and carries really well. But this new version is just more expensive and way heavier. And the MagnaCut steel, is just not enough to offset those more fundamental changes for me, at least. I appreciate that the axis lock's been redesigned to be stronger over time, but personally, I've never had an Omega spring break, so I don't care. Yeah, I don't mean to sound so negative, but when a knife is this expensive and it is only marginally better, even if you're being generous, than the old version, it's just hard to stay excited about it. And I hope for Benchmade's sake that they continue to do truly innovative things like redesigning their whole axis lock spring architecture without kind of pricing out the people that make up their core fan base. Okay, we finally reached my ranking for the Spyderco Military. And, despite the tip-down carry, despite the liner lock instead of the compression lock, I still think it's better than the stablemates in the Para 2 and Para 3. This clip was designed for this knife, so it's more comfortable than the kind of one-size-fits-all solution that comes on the Para 2 and Para 3. It's so easy to just pull out from the clip and you're already right there to deploy the blade. I don't know. Maybe it's Stockholm Syndrome. Maybe I just carried it too long to get used to it and didn't want to change. But this knife makes sense to me. The Military is just irreplaceable. Okay, and here's my ranking for the original 710. Even though I prefer using the Spyderco Military, the 710 is so much easier to carry. And it's not because it's tip up, it's just because of how slim it is, especially with this deep carry clip. It carries like a much smaller knife. And this right here is the best Spyderco Military ever made. It's I want to say KnifeWorks exclusive with S90V steel, titanium frame lock, and carbon fiber. You get a little bit more weight and solidity to the feel with that frame lock, but it's still pretty lightweight because it's half carbon fiber. This is a special knife, and I would absolutely pay dearly for a replacement if I were to ever lose this thing. Next up is my favorite knife that came out in 2022, I think. This is the Wii Vision, and it's weird and spectacular. Snex did not compromise at all when he was making this. He insisted that it be ambidextrous to the point that he put the pocket clip on the back of the knife. He insisted that it be easy to take apart for cleaning to the point that the lock bar springs out of the knife itself. It's so weird, in fact, that it alienated potential customers. I've spoken to people who didn't buy this knife because it didn't have a conventional pocket clip. And yes, you could look at that as a flaw, but it's also part of what makes this knife great. Now, this right here is one of the most underrated knives in all of knifedom. This is the Enzo Burke folder. Enzo changed their name to Brisa, so now it's the Brisa Burke, but whatever you want to call it, this knife is perfection. The size is perfect. You've got the traditional Puko, just general purpose, do-it-all type character. The quality is impeccable. The price is not crazy on these. You can still get them for like 150-ish. And there's just not a lot of folding Pukos out there. There's not a lot of competition for this knife. I don't know why It's not more popular, except that it just doesn't have great distribution. This version has the Scandi grind even. If you really, really want that Puko flavor, go for this one. You'll see later on in the S tier, I have the flat grind version. It's a perfect knife. Get one. Now this knife is this high up the list because it makes me smile every time I use it. This is the Spyderco Chalkway. Blew my mind when I first got it. Total impulse buy. I just kind of thought like, oh, that looks cool. It was on sale. Why not, right? I was ready to dismiss it as weird and uncomfortable and spiky and not good. And in use, it is amazing. The blade is so controllable. It's got that character of a Wharncliffe, but there's just enough belly right at the tip that you can do a lot more kind of utility cutting against a surface. This was also my first introduction to a design that had jimping here instead of here, and totally changed my mind about what the proper place for jimping even is, because this is where you want it. This is where you want to be able to feel where the edge is coming close, because that finger is going to be the one that contacts it. Yeah, the Chalkway is just a special, special knife, and not for everyone. Most people would say it's ugly, but I think it's amazing. So next up are my only two Hinderer knives, one of which is not even made by Hinderer. What we have here is the ZT392 and the Hinderer Eclipse. I really like Hinderer knives, but they also kind of frustrate me. Just little things like the fact that the hardware is different for every different part of the knife. The fact that you need a special tool to tweak the pivot. You know, Rick Hinderer does things his way, and he has very much earned the right to do it. So despite the changes that I would make, I respect what he's doing because his knives are so damn good. Okay, next up is one of my very favorite Spyderco designs and probably the best EDC knife in their catalog. That's going to be the Sage. The Sage is the knife you should get if you're shopping for a Spyderco in this size. It's better than the Para 3. It's better than the Native 5. The blade stock is thinner than either of them for better cutting. It's available in more options. It's got a wire clip, which is the superior clip. And even for collectors, you can go back and find the cool older Sages, like this Sage 4 here, the backlock version. Don't sleep on the Sage. Now, if you want one of the very best big knives you can get, period, the Benchmade Presidio 2 has got to be on your list. This is an incredible package. Not only is it still one of the most reasonably priced Benchmades in their catalog, it's also one of the best designed. It's perfectly balanced with its carbon fiber reinforced nylon scales. It cuts really well. It slices well. Kind of like the Les George Spartan. Like, this is peak tactical knife right here. This could be your only knife. It'll do everything. It's not perfectly suited for everything, but it's more than capable of it. And here we have the original Spyderco Stretch. This version has ZDP 189 steel and British Racing Green handles. The Stretch is too underrated. Even with the popularity of the new Stretch 2 with the straight spine, I still don't think people realize what a good knife this is. It's more comfortable than almost anything else they make. It's got all the features that you kind of want in a Spyderco, like the finger choil and the full flat grind, and it's basically the perfect work knife. The design is more refined than the look of it and the materials would lead you to expect. So you get like top tier, top dollar performance for a more affordable price, and that means you can actually work with it. This one was really tough to place for me because the Manix 2 is one of Spyderco's best designs, but I don't really like it much the way it comes from the factory. I think you really need to mod it in order to unlock all its potential. It's kind of like if Spyderco made a Benchmade, it would be the Manix 2. You got the ambidextrous lock. It feels like an axis lock, but you know, the internals work kind of differently. You could even argue it's better because it uses a single coil spring instead of two finicky Omega springs. So good. I only hope that Spyderco eventually iterates on it to deliver something more like these modified knives, because I just don't like the liners and the way that it comes from the factory. So yeah, get one and maybe expect to pay a little more in mods, or wait until Spyderco comes around. No spoilers. We're almost to the end. These are the very best of the best knives in my collection. And this is the ProTech Emerson CQC7, a legendary tactical knife made even better by ProTech's quality and materials. Ernest Emerson is a master of ergonomics, and ProTech is a master of making automatics. So you put the two together and you have something that I had to have for my collection. The last and greatest discontinued Spyderco in my collection is this Lum Chinese folder. So sad this one is gone because it's beautiful, it's unique, it's effective. Everything from the way it fits in your hand for great control with the ring and pinky fingers, to the way it cuts, to the way it opens and closed in this just beautiful, simple shape. Yeah, these are worth picking up if you can find them. Now we have what I consider to still be a very essential knife, the Benchmade 940. Do I even need to say anything else? There's still nothing like it. Even if you don't keep it forever, I feel like anybody who's passionate about knives and modern knife design needs to try a 940. But you know what's better than a 940? A Kaiser Drop Bear. If I was a more rational person, this knife could replace 90% of these other knives. It folds up small, but feels big in the hand. It's got enough blade length to do almost anything I need to do with it. It has a fantastic crossbar lock action. It's affordable. The only thing that the 940 does better than this is kind of substitute as like a dress knife. But I rarely need a dress knife, so I rarely have a need for a 940, you know? Yeah, this is the best knife that Kaiser makes and one of the best EDC folders you can get. This is the larger brother to that other Buck and Tom Mayo collab. This is the TNT, being just a little bit bigger, having contoured handles, and its drop point blade shape really puts it into another category for me. It's just one of the best knives that Buck has ever made, and I really wish Buck and Tom Mayo would collaborate again. These knives deserve to reach new knife buyers. All it needs is a couple little tweaks, you know, flip that clip around, and you have something that's truly world class. Now I have two TRM Adams in my collection, one with carbon fiber scales and the old school thumb studs. Great knife. So slicey, so well made. I love that you can swap the handles out. In fact, I've done it a few times. These have worn a number of different handles before they settled on this carbon fiber. But as cool as those thumb studs look, they're not as good as the more traditional thumb studs that come on the latest generation of the Atom. They're more comfortable to use. They don't snag on your pocket when you pull it out. Love this knife. I would carry it more if I had fewer knives. Next is the one and only Microtech in my collection, the SOCOM Elite. Still the best knife they make, in my opinion, and I didn't expect to like this knife that much, but kind of like the Hinderer Eclipse, you put it in your hand and it's undeniable. And it still cuts really, really well. Like, these are ground to be incredibly thin behind the edge. So even though the blade stock is kind of way too thick, you still have really effective cutting geometry. And as a result, I still carry this all the time. The first of several Chris Reeves on the table starts now with the Wilson Combat in Inkosi. I don't think I have a lot to say about the Inkosi or Chris Reeve knives in general that hasn't already been said 100 times in 1,000 different arguments on internet forums for decades. The Inkosi is great. It's not as good as the Sebenza. And I do prefer the Insingo blade slightly in the Inkosi to the drop point. I think the slightly more prescriptive handle of the Inkosi just works well with the less curvaceous blade. So Insingo blade shape is my pick between the two, but I'm definitely glad to have both in my collection. Now, even though aesthetically I prefer the TRM Atom, the TRM Neutron is a better knife. And for me, I think the reason is just that the extreme slimness of the overall design works better at this scale. It's not quite as elegant, but it feels better in the hand and it's a little more controllable in use. And this is that flat ground Brisa Burke that I was talking about earlier. It's everything that's great about a Puukko, the simplicity of it, the comfort, the multi-purpose utility, but in a folder with a flat grind. EDC perfection. Modern pocket knives just do not get much better than this, and when they do, you have to pay a lot more. Take, for example, this small Sebenza 21. An expensive knife to be sure, but worth it if you care about getting one of the best knives ever made. It's crazy because the Sebenza's always been expensive, and yet somehow today it feels like an even better value. I mean, I look at the knife market and I see folders that are $500, $700, $800, $900 that don't have nearly as much kind of performance and refinement and perfection grown over years and years of knife making than the Sebenza does. And, you know, not to be that guy, but just get a Sebenza. Now, I debated about where to put this next knife for a long time before it ended up this high, but Benchmade killed it with this one. This is the Mini Presidio 2 with M4 steel and aluminum handles. This was a limited edition. It's everything I wanted the Bug Out to be, but sturdier and with better blade steel. I love using this thing. I love sharpening it. It's small enough to carry, but big enough to give you a full fisted grip when you need it. Yeah, best Benchmade ever as far as I'm concerned. And until that Spyderco Stretch 2 XL gets new scales, this next knife is the best Spyderco ever. The Spidey Chef. I don't even love titanium frame locks necessarily, but it makes so much sense for this. The fact that all the hardware's waterproof, the titanium's waterproof, the blade steel's waterproof. Use it on lemons, limes, whatever. Put it away wet, forget about it, come back to it, and it's perfectly fine. The geometry for use on a cutting board is perfect. It's one of the most usable knife designs of all time. And for someone like me who uses their pocket knives on a lot of impromptu food prep, this is one of the best EDCs you can get. The next knife is kind of just a fancier version of one of my other favorites. If you took everything I liked about the Brisa Burke and just turned up the dial on the premiumness of the materials, you would get this Cheburkov Stitch. If I were to kind of spec out my ideal set of pocket knife characteristics, it would pretty much look like this. You've got contoured carbon fiber handles with a minimal amount of liners to keep weight down. You've got a sculpted titanium clip that actually works. It's got enough springiness to it to be a proper pocket clip, but it gives you that really clean aesthetic presentation. Flicks open great. I can even front flip this thing. Yeah. Such a pleasure to use. Okay, we've made it to the top three, and taking home the bronze is going to be this Arno Bernard flipper here. What an incredible knife. I actually got this in a trade. It's really not something I was seeking out. I don't even really like flippers that much, but this is the medium Sebenza flipper that people dream about. Like, it's right here. It exists. And it's amazing. You can flick it open, you can flip it. It's very fidget friendly, but it's also got that essential character of a Sebenza in that it's a hard-working knife. It doesn't have ball bearings in the pivot. It's got washers, so it's very stable. It feels very strong. The pocket clip is sculpted. Another thing I usually try to avoid on paper, but this one works perfectly. I think the one thing holding this back from being a true Sebenza killer is the blade steel. This has RWL34, good stuff, but not competitive at the price that these are selling at. You know, in that rarefied air of your $500 and $600 knives, most people expect Magna Cut at least. So I get why people hesitate to buy something like this, but it's one of the best knives I've ever owned. So if that's all you needed to hear to give one a shot, go for it. Okay, coming in at number 1 and number 2, we have the Sebenza. Sorry to be so boring, but it really is that good. Because here's the thing. Everything that's special about a Sebenza is not something that's obvious at first glance. I honestly think if I had bought a Sebenza, 6 months or a year into my own knife obsession, I would have hated it. I wouldn't have understood it. I would have been calling people who said the Sebenza was a great knife a moron on the internet. But once you get to understand what goes into knife making and manufacturing and making a product that's as long lasting and useful as the Sebenza is, you pick up what makes it so special. This knife was designed to be used forever, and every aspect of it is built around it doing its job as good as it can do forever. The hardware, custom made in-house, hardened steel, made to be taken apart and put back together hundreds of times. The lock geometry, stable, secure. Chris Reeve invented the frame lock. The blade grind, hollow for multiple sharpenings with no degradation in cutting power. The pocket clip, it's simple, but still one of the best pocket clips ever. You got that double dip in there to give you more security on your pants and this kind of beautiful tactile sensation every time you put it away or take it out. It could be your one and only knife, or you could buy 100 Sebenzas and still find something new in the next one. It's a great knife design and the best knife in my collection. And for those who think that, the Sebenza is the same old boring knife it's always been, the 31 is an improvement. Not only is Magna Cut steel just demonstrably better than S35 or S45 VN, it also received the ceramic ball bearing interface like on the Inkosi, and it feels even more refined than the 21. On a Sebenza 21, or really any knife with a liner or frame lock and a traditional detent, you have a little double snap when it opens. You get the sound when the detent falls off the blade, and then the sound when the lock engages. So together you get that little a flam for my fellow percussionists out there. But the 31 just has a single click into place. It's a unique sensory experience in the knife world, and I think it helps justify the price a little more. When you're paying this kind of money, you expect a special experience, and the 31 feels more special. And this Sebenza 31 is pretty special. It's got bog oak inlays and a polished blade with polished flats. It's a beautiful knife, and I think inarguably the best knife in my collection. Boy, this was a doozy. I've been recording for hours. The sun is setting. If you made it to the end, thanks for sticking around. This was pretty fun though. I would like to shoot and post more on my YouTube channel here. I think I still have more things to say about knives. I kind of have an interesting privilege here in that I already make my living from knives, and I'd like to share that with as many people as possible. Now that I see my collection here all at once, starting to feel like I need to get rid of some stuff. So maybe I can do some giveaway reviews or something like that. I don't know where this is going to go, but for now I'm having fun. So stick around and see what's next. Till the next time, take care.